I expected to happily surprise my loving parents with their favorite pastries from that little bakery downtown. Instead, I unlocked their heavy oak front door, only to find them lifeless and cold on the hardwood floor of their foyer. The bowls of seafood gumbo they had been eating were overturned on the antique rug. My screams tore through the quiet Atlanta neighborhood. Hours later, the medical examiner looked up at me with a grim expression and confirmed it was not a tragic double stroke. It was malicious poisoning. Thallium. Exactly 1 week later, the terrifying clue my husband found in my childhood bedroom left me completely paralyzed with fear. My own family had orchestrated this nightmare. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had your world shattered by the people you were supposed to trust the most. My name is Maya and I am 32 years old. As a forensic accountant, I spend my days untangling corporate fraud and financial crimes. I am trained to look at the world through a lens of cold, hard facts. But nothing could have prepared me for the icy reality of that Tuesday afternoon. The dispatcher on the phone kept telling me to perform CPR, but I knew it was too late. Their skin was already taking on an unnatural gray hue. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder until the flashing red and blue lights illuminated our living room. Paramedics swarmed the house, but their frantic energy quickly shifted into a somber, slow procession. The police taped off the area, treating my childhood home as an active crime scene. I sat on the front porch steps, shivering despite the humid Georgia heat. My husband Marcus rushed from his cybersecurity firm and wrapped his arms around me, holding me together as my world fell apart. Detective Hayes, a tall man with a weary face, approached us. He explained that the initial tox screen showed massive levels of a heavy metal toxin. Someone had deliberately laced their dinner. Someone wanted them dead. As the weight of the word homicide crushed the breath out of my lungs, a sleek silver Mercedes SUV aggressively pulled into the driveway, its tires screeching against the pavement. My younger sister Chloe stepped out wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a pristine white matching set. Right behind her was her husband Bradley. Bradley was a white man who always styled himself as a Wall Street genius, though his actual job title seemed to change every 6 months. Chloe immediately began sobbing, a loud, theatrical wail that seemed directed at the uniformed officers rather than the tragic reality inside the house. She threw her arms around a young deputy who looked incredibly uncomfortable. I stood up, waiting for my sister to run to me so we could mourn our parents together. But Bradley grabbed her arm and pulled her back. He did not look at me. He did not ask how it happened. He did not even look toward the front door, where the bodies of his in-laws were being photographed by crime scene technicians. Instead, he marched straight up to Detective Hayes. His face was devoid of any sorrow or shock. He carried an air of supreme arrogance, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive shirt before he spoke. "Officer, I am the financial executor of this estate," he announced, his voice cutting through the humid air with a sharp, entitled edge. "I need to know exactly when this house will be unsealed. There are highly sensitive business documents and bank tokens inside that I need to secure immediately. My parents own a massive restaurant chain, and I cannot have their assets frozen because of this inconvenience." I stared at him, my blood turning to ice. My parents were not even in the morgue yet, and my brother-in-law was already treating their murder as a temporary hurdle to their bank accounts. He called their brutal poisoning an inconvenience. Detective Hayes narrowed his eyes at Bradley, writing something down in his notepad. I stepped forward, my voice shaking with a mixture of profound grief and sudden blinding rage. "Bradley, what is wrong with you?" I demanded. "They were just murdered and you are asking about bank tokens." Bradley finally looked at me, his eyes cold and calculating. He let out a loud, condescending sigh as if dealing with a stubborn child. "Grow up, Maya," he sneered. "Someone has to protect the family empire while you are busy having a meltdown." The absolute lack of empathy in his eyes was chilling. That was the exact moment I truly realized my parents' death was not random, and Bradley was already planning his next move. I took a step closer to Bradley, my hands clenching into fists at my sides. You are standing 30 feet away from where my mother and father took their last painful breaths, and all you can think about is their money. I kept my voice low, but the fury vibrating through my chest made every word sound like a threat. Bradley did not even flinch. He simply adjusted his designer watch and turned his body fully toward Detective Hayes, completely ignoring my presence. "Officer, you need to understand the complex family dynamics here," Bradley said, his voice suddenly dripping with fake concern and forced patience. "Maya has not been a real part of this family for over 5 years. She is completely estranged. She cut ties with her own parents because they would not take her side when she maliciously refused to help her little sister." I stared at him in sheer disbelief. He was doing it. He was spinning a calculated narrative while my parents' bodies were literally still inside the house. Detective Hayes stopped writing and looked up, his weary eyes shifting between me and Bradley. "Is this true?" he asked, his tone noticeably colder than it had been 5 minutes ago. I opened my mouth to explain, but Bradley talked right over me, raising his voice so the other uniformed officers on the lawn could hear him. "My wife Chloe asked Maya for a simple loan a few years ago to keep her small business afloat." Bradley continued, pointing a perfectly manicured finger in my direction. "Maya here makes mid-six figures as a corporate accountant, but she let her own sister's boutique go bankrupt out of pure spite. Her parents were absolutely disgusted by her deep greed and they essentially cut her off. She has been extremely bitter and completely desperate ever since." "That is a complete and utter lie," I shouted, unable to hold back the anger any longer. "I refused to give you $50,000 because I knew you were using Chloe to fund your failed day trading habits. You have been leeching off my family since the day you met her." Chloe let out another theatrical wail, burying her face deep into Bradley's shoulder. "Please stop it, Maya," Chloe sobbed, her voice muffled against his expensive suit jacket. "Can you just stop attacking us for one single day? Mom and Dad are gone and you are just making a massive scene. Why do you always have to ruin everything?" The manipulation was so incredibly seamless it made my stomach turn. Chloe was 28 years old, but she still played the helpless golden child to absolute perfection. She clung to Bradley like a terrified toddler, allowing him to stand tall as the responsible, brave protector of the family. The officers exchanged quiet glances. I could see the subtle shift in their physical posture. The warm empathy they had shown me when I first found the bodies was completely gone. Now they were looking at me as the angry, resentful outcast daughter who had a strong financial motive to hate her parents. Detective Hayes flipped to a fresh page in his small notebook. "When was the exact last time you spoke to your parents, Maya?" he asked. His use of my first name instead of formal titles felt very pointed. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing heart. "I brought pastries to surprise them," I said. Bradley let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Did you surprise them with a visit, or surprise them with a frantic request for cash?" Bradley sneered loudly. "Maybe you finally realized you needed your inheritance a little early." Marcus stepped directly in front of me, physically shielding me from Bradley's smug face. "Back off," Marcus warned, his voice calm. "My wife just found her parents dead. If you say one more word to her, I will physically remove you from this property myself." "Gentlemen, please," Detective Hayes intervened, stepping between them. "Emotions are extremely high right now. We are dealing with a tragic double homicide. I need everyone to step back and let us do our jobs." Bradley immediately raised his hands in a gesture of peaceful compliance. "Of course," Detective Bradley said smoothly, adjusting his silk tie. "As the designated financial executor and the only reliable family member present, I will be the main point of contact moving forward. My wife is too devastated to handle the logistics, and her sister is clearly unstable. Here is my business card. Please call me the moment the house opens." Hayes took the card and nodded deeply. I stood there shivering in the heavy heat, realizing with absolute terror that Bradley was not just insulting me to my face. He was laying the groundwork to frame me for murder. The next morning, the reality of what happened settled into my bones like lead. I did not sleep. I could not close my eyes without seeing my parents on that hardwood floor. By 6 in the morning, Marcus was in the kitchen, brewing dark roast coffee, while I sat in my home office surrounded by glowing monitors. The grief was heavy, but the forensic accountant inside me was wide awake. My parents built a massive soul food empire from a single food truck in the 90s. Their business accounts held millions of dollars in liquid assets and operational funds. I knew Bradley was a shark, and given his bizarre behavior at the crime scene, my immediate priority was to freeze all the corporate bank accounts to protect my parents' legacy. I pulled up the central financial portal for the restaurant chain. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, typing in the master administrative credentials my father had entrusted to me 5 years ago when I helped restructure their tax liabilities. The screen loaded for a fraction of a second before flashing a bright red error message. Access, denied password, incorrect. I frowned and leaned closer to the monitor. I retyped the password, making sure the caps lock was off. Access denied. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I quickly navigated to the secondary banking portal, the one used exclusively for payroll and emergency vendor payments. Access denied, account locked. I reached for my phone to call the bank directly, but before I could dial, the screen lit up with a new text message. It was an unknown number, but the arrogant tone was unmistakable. The message contained a high-resolution screenshot of my failed login attempts from just moments ago, complete with my unique IP address and the exact timestamps. Underneath the image was a text that made my blood run cold. I am the financial executor now. Stop trying to steal from your dead parents. Stay away from the business or I will have you arrested for cyberstalking. It was Bradley. He had not even waited 24 hours after their murder to seize total control of the company's servers. The sheer speed of his takeover was staggering. To change corporate banking credentials and server passwords, you need legal authorization. You need notarized documents, death certificates, or a very specific power of attorney. My parents' bodies were barely cold. The autopsy was not even finished yet. There was absolutely no legal way Bradley could have obtained the necessary paperwork to execute a hostile takeover of a multi-million-dollar company overnight, unless he had planned it in advance. Marcus walked into the office carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He took one look at my pale face and set the mugs down on the desk. "What is it?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. I handed him my phone. Marcus read the message, his jaw clenching. He leaned over my shoulder and looked at the locked screens on my monitors. "He locked me out," I whispered, staring at the blinking cursor on the error page. "He changed every password, every security question, every backup email. He took the entire company overnight." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, analyzing the situation from his perspective as a cybersecurity expert. "Maya, this takes days of preparation," he said quietly. "He would need the primary tokens and the physical hardware authenticators from your dad's safe. He would need an IT team ready to migrate the permissions the moment he gave the signal. He did not just react to their deaths, Maya. He was waiting for them." The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Bradley did not just want to protect the family empire from an estranged daughter. He wanted unrestricted access to millions of dollars in untraceable cash, and he wanted it immediately. He knew I was the only person with the financial expertise to spot his irregularities, so he painted me as the greedy outcast to the police and locked me out of the system before I could even process my grief. I took a deep breath, letting the cold, analytical part of my brain take complete control. Bradley thought he had outsmarted me. He thought because he changed a few passwords I was powerless. But he forgot who he was dealing with. I am a forensic accountant. I track invisible money for a living. People like Bradley always leave a digital footprint. They always make a mistake driven by their own blinding greed. I opened a secure encrypted terminal. Marcus watched me closely. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm going hunting," I replied, my voice steady. "If Bradley wants a war, he just started one with the wrong woman. I will destroy him." 3 days later, the doors of the Greater Zion megachurch opened to a sea of 500 people. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the hum of gospel music. My parents were pillars of the African American business community in Atlanta, and it felt like half the city had shown up to pay their respects. Mayors, politicians, and fellow restaurateurs filled the pews. I walked down the center aisle with Marcus holding my hand tight. Every step felt like walking through quicksand. My eyes were fixed on the two closed mahogany caskets at the front of the sanctuary. When I reached the front row, the family section was already occupied. Chloe sat in the center wearing a black lace dress. Bradley sat right beside her wearing a sharp, tailored suit. He was shaking hands and accepting condolences from the city council members, acting like the grieving heir to the empire. I felt a surge of nausea, but forced myself to sit at the end of the pew. I was not going to let them ruin my final goodbye to my parents. I had spent the last 2 sleepless nights writing my eulogy, pouring every ounce of love and heartbreak into those pages. When the pastor concluded his opening prayer, he announced that a family member would come forward to share a few words. I stood up, clutching my folded papers. I was ready to honor them. I took 2 steps toward the altar before a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned in shock. 2 large men in black suits and earpieces had stepped out from the shadows of the side aisle. They blocked my path to the microphone. "Excuse me?" I whispered, trying to pull my arm away. "I am the eldest daughter. I am giving the eulogy." One of the security guards shook his head and crossed his arms, standing firm like a brick wall. Before I could demand an explanation, the sound of a microphone feeding back echoed through the sanctuary. I looked up to the pulpit. Bradley was standing there. He adjusted the microphone with a practiced motion, looking out over the sea of 500 faces. "Thank you all for coming to honor my beloved in-laws," Bradley said, his voice echoing through the church. "Unfortunately, my sister-in-law Maya will not be speaking today." The congregation fell silent. 500 pairs of eyes turned to look at me standing in the aisle, being boxed in by 2 hired thugs. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "As many of you know, this horrific tragedy has taken a toll on our family." Bradley continued, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. "Maya has been struggling with her mental health for years. Her estrangement from her parents was painful for everyone, and given the shocking nature of their passing, she is experiencing a psychological break. We cannot allow her to traumatize herself or this congregation any further. Please pray for her healing." His lie paralyzed my brain. Murmurs and whispers rippled through the pews. Older women in the congregation shook their heads, looking at me with pity. The city council members exchanged glances. Bradley had weaponized my grief and painted me as a mentally unstable outcast in front of the community. I saw red. I crumpled the papers in my hand and lunged forward, trying to push past the security guards. "Let me go," I demanded, my voice rising above a whisper. "Tell them the truth, Bradley. You locked me out of the company. You are a liar." My outburst only seemed to confirm his narrative. The security guards gripped my arms tighter, pushing me back. Marcus grabbed me from behind, wrapping his arms around my waist and pulling me tight against his chest. "Stop, Maya," Marcus whispered into my ear. "Do not give them what they want. Look around. He is putting on a show and he wants you to look crazy. If you fight these guards in a church, you will prove him right. You need to walk away now." I stopped struggling, but my body shook with the force of my rage. I looked up at Bradley standing at the pulpit. He was looking right at me with a triumphant smirk on his face. He knew exactly what he was doing. He isolated me from my family, locked me out of my inheritance, and now he had destroyed my reputation within my own community. I turned my back on the pulpit and let Marcus lead me out of the sanctuary, walking past hundreds of judging eyes. Every step toward the doors fueled the fire burning inside me. Bradley had won the battle today, but had no idea what kind of war was coming for him. We did not stay for the burial reception. I could not stomach the thought of watching Bradley shake hands over my parents' freshly turned graves, accepting sympathy he did not deserve. Instead, Marcus drove us directly to my parents' estate. I needed to gather their personal photo albums and a few cherished family heirlooms before the probate process officially froze the physical assets. The sprawling brick mansion sat at the end of a long tree-lined driveway. It was the house I grew up in, the house my parents built from the ground up with the profits from their very first soul food restaurant. As I stepped out of the car, the heavy Georgia heat pressed against my black funeral dress. I walked up to the towering wrought iron gates that guarded the property. I reached into my purse and pulled out the heavy brass key I had carried on my keychain since I was 16 years old. I slid it into the lock and turned. It jammed. I pulled it out, wiped it on my dress, and tried again, pushing harder this time. It did not budge. Not. I looked closer at the metal housing. The entire lock cylinder was brand new. Then I noticed the sleek black camera lens staring down at me from the stone pillar, right above a freshly installed biometric keypad. A high-tech motorized deadbolt hummed softly from inside the pillar. The security system had been completely replaced. I grabbed the iron bars and rattled the gate, a sudden wave of panic washing over me. Through the gaps in the tall oak trees, I had a clear view of the mansion's massive front bay windows. The lights were blazing inside. There, sitting in my mother's custom-upholstered wingback chairs, were Chloe and Bradley. They were not wearing their funeral clothes anymore. Chloe was in a silk robe, laughing at something on her phone. Bradley was pouring a generous glass of my father's most expensive vintage red wine. The sheer audacity of the scene made my stomach physically heave. They had just buried my parents 2 hours ago. Now they were lounging in their home, drinking their private wine collection like they had just won the lottery. I banged my fists against the iron gate. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice carrying up the long driveway. "Open this gate right now!" Bradley slowly turned his head. He took a deliberate sip of the wine, swirled it in the glass, and smiled. He whispered something to Chloe. Bradley set his glass down on the antique mahogany table and leisurely walked out the front door, strolling down the driveway with his hands casually tucked into his pockets. When he reached the gate, he stood on the other side of the iron bars, looking at me like I was a stray dog. "What is the matter?" Maya, Bradley asked, feigning innocent surprise. "Did you forget the gate code?" "Oh wait, you do not have it because you do not live here anymore." "Open the gate, Bradley," I demanded, my voice dangerously low. "I came to get my mother's photo albums and my father's watch. You have absolutely no legal right to lock me out of my childhood home." Bradley chuckled, a dry, hollow sound that grated against my nerves. "Actually, Maya, I have every legal right," he said smoothly. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. He flicked his wrist and tossed it over the top of the gate. The paper fluttered down and landed in the dirt at my feet. I stared at it for a second before bending down to pick it up. My hands shook as I unfolded the thick parchment. It was a medical and financial power of attorney document. I scanned the dense legal text, my eyes jumping straight to the bottom of the second page. The legal jargon was airtight. It granted Bradley absolute and total control over all their personal assets, medical decisions, and real estate properties. It was dated exactly 1 month before they were murdered. I stared at the signatures. They looked real, but the strokes were slightly uneven, as if signed in a major hurry or under immense pressure. "You see, Maya, your parents finally woke up and realized you were a lost cause," Bradley sneered through the bars. "They knew Chloe was not good with numbers, so they asked me to step in and manage the estate. They wanted to make sure their legacy was protected from greedy, estranged relatives like you." "You forged this!" I spat, clutching the paper so hard it crumpled in my fist. "My parents would never sign over the entire estate to you." "Prove it," Bradley challenged, his eyes gleaming with malicious delight. "Prove it in court, Maya. Drain your savings fighting me. But until a judge says otherwise, this piece of paper means I own this house. I own the business, and I own every single memory inside those walls. Now get off my property before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." He turned his back on me and walked slowly up the driveway, taking a victorious sip of his wine before disappearing back into the mansion. I stood outside the iron gates of my own home, holding a piece of paper that had just erased my entire past. Marcus placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Let him have his little victory today," Marcus said quietly. "We are taking this straight to the lawyer tomorrow morning." The next morning, my lawyer's office offered no comfort. Marcus and I sat across from David Sterling, an attorney who knew my family. He adjusted his glasses and stared at the crumpled power of attorney document I retrieved from the dirt outside my home. The silence in the room was suffocating. I watched his eyes scan the dense paragraphs, searching for a loophole. David let out a sigh and placed the paper flat on his desk. "This is completely ironclad, Maya," he said, his voice filled with genuine regret. "It gives Bradley absolute legal authority over all personal and corporate assets. The notary stamp is authentic, and the witnesses are two clerks from a reputable firm downtown." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Look at the signatures, David," I urged him. "Look at my father's handwriting. He was a proud man who took his time signing legal documents. The loops on his letters were always perfectly even. These signatures are jagged. They look rushed. They look signed under extreme duress or heavy medication." David nodded, pulling a magnifying glass to inspect the ink. "You are right. The pen strokes show hesitation and uneven pressure," he admitted. "But proving coercion in a court of law is incredibly difficult. Bradley has the paperwork, and right now he holds all the cards. We would need to file a massive injunction to stop him from liquidating the estate, and that process could take months." While David explained the timeline, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a notification from Chloe. I felt a sudden spike of dread in my chest. I picked up the device and swiped open the message. It was a video file. I tapped the screen to play it. The footage opened on the circular driveway of the estate. A massive, rusted industrial dumpster sat on the manicured front lawn. 3 men marched out the front doors carrying heavy boxes. I zoomed in, my breath catching in my throat. Scrawled across the side of the top box in thick black marker were the words, "Maya's room." I watched in absolute horror as the men reached the edge of the dumpster and casually tossed the boxes over the side. The impact sent a cloud of dust into the air. One of the boxes split open, spilling its contents. I saw my high school debate trophies, my vintage book collection, and the beautiful hand-carved wooden jewelry box my father had made for my Sweet 16. The men laughed as they tossed the items into the steel container. The video cut off abruptly. Immediately, a text bubble popped up from Chloe. "Bradley says we need to clear out the trash to stage the house for selling. Sorry, not sorry." The sheer cruelty of the message hit me like a physical punch to the gut. They were not just taking the money. They were actively erasing my existence from the family. They wanted to obliterate any physical proof that I had ever been loved by my parents. Marcus saw the color drain from my face and leaned over. "They are throwing everything away," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with contained fury. "Everything you left behind." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with angry tears. Bradley was moving faster than a legal injunction could ever stop him. He was staging the house for a rapid sale, trying to convert the physical real estate into untraceable liquid cash. He knew he had a small window before I could mobilize a legal defense, and he was ruthlessly exploiting it. David looked at me with deep concern. "What is it, Maya? What did they do?" I slowly turned my phone around and slid it across the glass desk so David could read the message. I wiped my eyes and sat up perfectly straight. The overwhelming grief that had been paralyzing me for the past 4 days suddenly evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. "David," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, "I do not want you to file an injunction. Let him think he has total control. Let him think he has completely erased me." David looked deeply confused. "Maya, if we do not file an injunction, he will sell the house and the business." I stood up and quickly grabbed my black leather purse. "Exactly," I replied. "Let him find a buyer. Let him put the pieces in motion. My brother-in-law thinks he is a financial genius playing a game of checkers. But I am a forensic accountant and we are playing chess. I am not going to fight him for the house, David. I am going to let him dig his own grave and then I am going to bury him in it. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in the sterile glass conference room of my parents' official estate lawyer, Mr. Harrison. Marcus sat to my left, his jaw clenched tight. Across the heavy oak table sat Chloe and Bradley. Chloe was dressed in black designer clothing, playing the role of the grieving daughter, while discreetly checking her phone under the table. Bradley was leaning back in his leather chair, exuding an unbearable arrogance. He wore a smug smile that made my blood boil. Mr. Harrison, a usually confident man, walked into the room sweating profusely. He carried a thin folder and would not look me in the eye. That was my first warning sign. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and opened the folder. His hands were visibly shaking. He announced that we were there to read the final will and testament of my parents. I leaned forward expecting to hear the terms of the trust they had established years ago, but he pulled out a single freshly printed sheet of paper. He stated that this new will had been drafted and finalized exactly 3 weeks before my parents were murdered. I felt a cold chill wash over me. 3 weeks. Mr. Harrison began to read the document aloud. His voice cracked as he reached the distribution of assets. To our daughter Chloe, we leave the entirety of our financial holdings, our real estate portfolio, and the complete ownership of the restaurant group valued at $15 million. To our eldest daughter Maya, we leave nothing. The room fell into a dead silence. I stared at Mr. Harrison, waiting for him to correct himself, waiting for the punchline of a sick joke. He swallowed hard and closed the folder. I asked him what he was talking about. I reminded him that my parents had an established estate plan that split everything equally and protected the business. Mr. Harrison refused to make eye contact. He kept looking nervously across the table at Bradley. He stammered, saying the new document superseded all previous versions. He claimed my parents had come into his office highly agitated and demanded the change immediately. I demanded to see the paper. I snatched it from the table before Bradley could reach it. Just like the power of attorney, the signatures were jagged and rushed. It did not make any sense. My parents were meticulous business owners. They would never dismantle their entire legacy on a single page. You are lying, I said, staring directly at Mr. Harrison. They would never do this. You have known my family for 20 years, and you know this is a complete fabrication. Did Bradley threaten you? Mr. Harrison flinched, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked absolutely terrified. Bradley abruptly slammed his hands on the table, making everyone jump. Watch your tone, Maya, Bradley barked, his voice echoing in the glass room. You are insulting a respected attorney just because you did not get your way. Your parents woke up and realized you were a bitter, estranged woman who cared more about your corporate accounting job than your own flesh and blood. They wanted to protect their $15 million empire from someone who refused to even lend her sister a few $1,000s. They cut you out because you are a toxic presence in this family. I turned my attention to Chloe. She was staring at her manicured nails, completely detached from the reality that her husband had just stolen our parents' life work. Chloe, how can you sit there and let him do this? I asked, my voice trembling. Do you really believe Mom and Dad just erased me 3 weeks before someone poisoned them? Do you not see the timeline here? Chloe finally looked up, her eyes cold and empty. Bradley handles the business, she said flatly. Mom and Dad trusted him. You should just accept it, Maya. Bradley let out a sharp, cruel laugh. He leaned across the table, his face mere inches from mine. You are officially a beggar, Maya, he whispered, his breath smelling of stale coffee and pure malice. You have absolutely nothing. No house, no inheritance, no family. You are completely alone. So go back to your little spreadsheet job and leave the real money to the adults. If you try to fight this, I will drag your name through the mud until you cannot even get a job balancing checkbooks. Marcus stood up, kicking his chair back so hard it crashed into the glass wall. We are done here, Marcus said, grabbing my hand. He glared at Bradley with a lethal intensity. Enjoy the fantasy while it lasts, Bradley. because when the reality hits, it is going to break your neck. We quickly walked out, leaving Bradley smirking in his newly stolen kingdom. I stopped at the heavy wooden door of the law office, refusing to take another step. I turned back around and marched straight to the conference table. I am not signing the acknowledgement of this will, I stated, my voice echoing against the glass walls. Mr. Harrison looked up in panic, clutching his pen. You have to sign it, Maya, to acknowledge you were present for the reading, he pleaded. I shook my head, crossing my arms tightly over my chest. I will not put my name on a fraudulent document. Bradley let out a low whistle, leaning back in his chair. He reached down and lifted a thick manila folder from his leather briefcase. He tossed it onto the center of the table with a heavy thud. It slid across the polished wood, stopping in front of me. I do not care if you sign the paper, Maya, Bradley said, his eyes locking onto mine. Because your signature is already on plenty of other documents. I stared at the folder. What is this? I demanded. Open it, he challenged, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. I reached out and flipped it open. The first page was a highly detailed financial background check on the family restaurant group. The second page was a comprehensive credit pull on my parents' personal assets. The third page was a forensic audit request logging my exact IP address. My heart hammered. These were routine inquiries I had performed months ago when my father asked me to review their tax liabilities. They were completely benign. But looking at them now, completely out of context, they painted a very different picture. Bradley tapped his finger against the top page. It looks like someone was doing a lot of snooping. He noted, his voice dripping with faux innocence. It looks like an estranged daughter who was cut out of the family was desperately trying to figure out exactly how much cash her parents had liquid. It looks like she was plotting a hostile takeover. You know, my father asked me to run these reports. I fired back, my hands shaking with absolute rage. He asked me to help restructure the payroll taxes because you were mismanaging the vendor accounts. Bradley chuckled, shaking his head slowly. I do not know anything about that, Maya. All I see is a bitter woman who was obsessed with her parents' money just weeks before they were tragically poisoned. Chloe finally looked up from her phone. You really did a background check on Mom and Dad? She asked, her voice trembling with manufactured betrayal. Maya, how could you do that? They gave you everything and you were treating them like a corporate target. Shut up, Chloe, I snapped, refusing to play into her ridiculous performance. You both know exactly what these documents are. They prove nothing. Bradley smiled, a wide, predatory grin that did not reach his eyes. Oh, I think they prove a lot, he countered smoothly. They prove motive, Maya. They prove you had a deep financial obsession with the estate right before the murders. They prove you were digging into accounts you had no business looking at. And they prove you were angry enough to do something drastic when you found out they were cutting you off. I stared at him, realizing the depth of the trap he had meticulously set. He had not just forged a will and stolen the assets, he had actively hunted down my professional footprints and weaponized them against me. You are out of your mind if you think a judge will look at a simple credit pull and assume murder, I said, gripping the edge of the table. I do not need a judge to assume anything, Bradley replied softly. I just needed the homicide detectives to see the bigger picture. I felt the blood drain from my face. What did you do? I whispered. Bradley stood up, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. I gave a copy of that exact folder to Detective Hayes yesterday morning. Bradley stated, his voice echoing with absolute finality. I told him how worried Chloe and I were about your erratic behavior. I told him about your desperate need for cash. I told him that you were the last person to visit the house on the day they died. Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. You framed her, Marcus growled, his muscles tensing. Bradley raised his hands in a gesture of total surrender. I did not frame anyone, Marcus. I simply provided the police with factual financial records. It is their job to investigate a suspect with a clear motive. I watched Bradley walk past us, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. He handed the police everything they needed to arrest me. The drive home was suffocatingly quiet. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tight. I stared out the window, anticipating Bradley's next move. He planted the documents to establish a motive, but that was not enough for a murder charge. He needed physical evidence to tie me directly to the poison. As Marcus turned onto our street, my stomach dropped. Our house was blocked by 3 police cruisers. Their red and blue lights flashed, casting harsh shadows across the driveway. Neighbors stood on their porches, recording the spectacle on their phones. Detective Hayes stood on our lawn, flanked by 4 officers wearing blue latex gloves. Marcus parked the car and we rushed toward the yard. I demanded to know what was going on. Detective Hayes held up a folded piece of paper. He stated a judge granted a search warrant based on an anonymous tip received an hour ago. He said the caller claimed to have seen me disposing of suspicious chemical containers late at night. I told him that was a complete lie and that Bradley was obviously the person who made that call. Hayes ignored my protests and signaled to the officers standing near the side gate. They were not searching inside our house. They were completely focused on the large green municipal trash bins lined up against our fence, waiting for tomorrow's collection. I watched as an officer tipped the recycling bin over, spilling crushed cardboard boxes and plastic bottles onto the grass. Another officer carefully sifted through the dark trash bags. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. I knew I had nothing to hide, but the overwhelming dread of a setup paralyzed me. Suddenly, an officer yelled out, pulling a small, clear plastic bag from the bottom of the bin. Inside the bag was a tiny amber glass vial with a faded white label. Detective Hayes walked over and inspected the bag without touching the vial. He looked back at me, his expression completely hardened. He announced that the field test on the residue inside the vial showed positive traces of thallium. The world around me stopped spinning. The air left my lungs in a sudden rush. I shook my head, insisting that I had never seen that bottle before, and that someone must have planted it there. Marcus stepped in front of me, yelling at the detective that the bins were kept outside, and anyone could have walked up and dropped that vial into the trash. Hayes did not blink. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt and told Marcus to step back or face obstruction charges. I felt the cold metal clamp down hard around my wrists, locking securely into place. The sharp click of the handcuffs echoed in my ears, drowning out everything else. They walked me across my own front lawn, parading me like a dangerous criminal in front of everyone I knew in the neighborhood. I kept my head held high, refusing to let them see me cry, but the humiliation burned deep into my soul. Marcus promised he would call David and get me out as they guided me into the back of the police cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing me inside the claustrophobic cage. The plastic seat was hard, and the air conditioning barely cut through the afternoon heat. As the cruiser pulled away from my house, the officer driving turned on the dashboard monitor. A local news station was broadcasting live. I leaned forward, trying to see the small screen through the metal grate. My blood ran completely cold. Standing in front of the police headquarters, surrounded by reporters with microphones, was my sister Chloe. She was wearing her black funeral dress, wiping carefully manufactured tears from her eyes. The reporter asked her about the breaking news of an arrest in the poisoning case. Chloe looked directly into the camera, her voice trembling with a perfect mix of sorrow and betrayal. She told the reporters that our family was completely devastated. She said she always knew I struggled with severe jealousy and deep mental instability, but she never imagined I could do something this monstrous just to get my hands on the family money. She looked right through the lens, making sure her performance reached every screen in the city. Bradley stood right behind her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder, playing the protective husband. He had orchestrated the entire raid perfectly. He planted the poison, tipped off the police, and sent his wife out to the media to ensure I was convicted in the court of public opinion before I ever saw a judge. I sat in the back of the police car, realizing that my family truly wanted me locked away for the rest of my life. The interrogation room was exactly as cold and sterile as they portray on television. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly pale glow across the scratched metal table. I sat in a rigid plastic chair with my hands resting flat on the table. They had finally removed the handcuffs, but the metal had left angry red bracelets bruised into my skin. I stared at the two-way mirror, knowing Marcus was likely tearing the precinct apart, trying to get to me. The heavy steel door groaned open and Detective Hayes walked in. He tossed a thick manila folder onto the table and sat down across from me. He let out a long, exhausted sigh and leaned back, folding his arms. "Maya, we have the vial." He started, his voice low and practiced. "We have the financial records showing you were looking into their accounts. We have a statement from your own sister saying you have been increasingly hostile and desperate for cash. It is over. If you confess now, I can talk to the district attorney about taking the death penalty off the table." I did not blink. I did not cry. The sheer audacity of his threat crystallized my focus. The terrified, grieving daughter vanished, and the forensic accountant took complete control. I looked Detective Hayes dead in the eye. "Detective, I hide things for a living," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "I investigate shell corporations, offshore tax havens, and encrypted crypto wallets. My entire professional career is built on burying and unearthing microscopic details that federal agencies miss. So I want you to ask yourself a very simple, logical question. If I orchestrated a brilliant, untraceable poisoning using a rare heavy metal toxin, do you honestly believe I would throw the murder weapon into my own green municipal recycling bin right in front of my house on trash day?" Hayes frowned slightly but quickly recovered. "Criminals make stupid mistakes under pressure, Maya." "I am not a criminal and I do not make sloppy mistakes," I fired back, leaning across the metal table. "But let us talk about who does. Did you look at the dates on the financial documents Bradley handed you? Those credit pulls were from 6 months ago, when my father specifically asked me to audit his vendor payroll. Did you happen to ask Bradley how he managed to obtain a comprehensive medical and financial power of attorney that was allegedly signed 4 weeks ago but only surfaced the exact day my parents were murdered? Did you ask him how he instantly changed every single corporate banking password less than 12 hours after their bodies were discovered?" Hayes opened his mouth to speak, but I did not give him the chance. I kept hammering him with the facts. "Bradley planted that vile detective. He called in the anonymous tip. He sent his wife out to the news cameras to feed you a motive because he needs me in a jail cell. If I am locked up, I cannot contest the fraudulent will he just produced. He is liquidating a $15 million estate right under your nose, and you are helping him do it." A flicker of doubt finally crossed the detective's weary face. He looked down at the folder and back up at me. Before he could formulate a response, the heavy steel door swung open so hard it slammed against the concrete wall. Marcus stepped into the room. Right beside him was Julian, a high-powered defense attorney, known for destroying prosecutors in court. Julian did not even look at the detective. He pointed a manicured finger at Hayes. "This interview is over," Julian declared, his voice booming with absolute authority. "My client is leaving. You have zero physical evidence tying her to that planted vial, other than an anonymous call that my private investigator is already tracing. If you attempt to hold her for another minute, I will personally sue this department for malicious prosecution and civil rights violations." Hayes stood up, his jaw tight. He knew he had been outmaneuvered. He did not have enough for a formal charge yet. He grabbed his folder and walked out of the room without another word. Marcus rushed forward and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me tight against his chest. I buried my face in his shirt, letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding for hours. Julian led us out of the precinct through the back exit to avoid the swarm of reporters Bradley had staged out front. The cool night air hit my face as we walked quickly to Marcus' parked car. When we were finally safe inside the quiet cabin of the vehicle, Marcus slammed his hands against the steering wheel in frustration. "We cannot rely on the police to figure this out," Marcus said, his voice shaking with anger. "They are moving too slow. By the time they realize Bradley is playing them, he will have sold the entire company and vanished with the cash." I stared out the passenger window at the passing streetlights. The fear that had gripped me all day was completely gone. In its place was a cold, calculated fury. Marcus was right. The justice system was built to be slow, and Bradley was exploiting that exact weakness. He was using white-collar tactics to cover up a blue-collar murder. I turned to Marcus. my mind already mapping out the financial destruction of my brother-in-law. You are right, I said, my voice hollow but resolute. The law is too slow. They want to play white-collar games. Fine, I am going to financially execute them. Exactly 1 week had passed since the horrific discovery in my parents' foyer. The physical trauma of being arrested and paraded on the evening news had faded into a cold, relentless determination. It was Tuesday night, and we were locked inside Marcus' home office. The room was dark, except for the harsh blue light radiating from 3 massive computer monitors. Marcus sat in his ergonomic chair, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with blistering speed. He was a former military cybersecurity specialist, and right now he was treating my parents' estate like a hostile digital target. I paced the floor behind him, drinking my 4th cup of black coffee. We knew Bradley was moving fast to liquidate the assets, but to do that cleanly, he needed to destroy any digital evidence of his past financial mismanagement. Marcus was trying to ping the IP address of my parents' old central router before Bradley's hired IT team could permanently wipe the local servers and the linked cloud backups. Bradley did not just change the passwords, Marcus said, his eyes darting across lines of scrolling green text. He installed a massive enterprise-grade firewall. This is corporate military-level security. He is paying someone a lot of money to keep this network locked down tight. I leaned over his shoulder, staring at the impenetrable wall of code. Can you get past it? I asked, my voice tense. Marcus let out a short, confident breath. Bradley forgot one crucial detail. He replied, I am the one who built your parents' original network infrastructure 5 years ago. I always leave a backdoor open for emergencies. He executed a complex string of commands. The terminal screen blinked, and suddenly a command prompt appeared. He was inside the outer layer of the mansion network. But the victory was incredibly short-lived. Almost immediately, entire blocks of code began flashing bright red on the second monitor. Marcus cursed under his breath, leaning closer to the screen. We have a major problem, he announced, his hands moving even faster. I am not the only one inside the system right now. Bradley's IT guy is currently logged in with ultimate administrator privileges. He is not just locking the accounts Maya, he is actively wiping the entire server architecture. We watched in absolute horror as the directory tree began collapsing. Folders containing years of meticulous financial records, tax returns, vendor contracts, and family photographs were being systematically scrubbed into digital dust. He is initiating a secure erase protocol. Marcus explained, his voice tight with urgency. He is overwriting the data with zeros, so it can never be recovered by any forensic team. It is a complete scorched earth tactic. We have to stop him, I urged, gripping the back of Marcus' chair. We cannot lose those files. Marcus shook his head, his eyes locked on the battle playing out on the screens. I cannot stop him from the outside without triggering a complete system lockdown, he said. I have to bypass his active session and siphon whatever I can through my backdoor tunnel before he reaches the hidden partitions. The room fell dead silent, except for the frantic clacking of the keyboard. It was a digital race against an invisible enemy. The progress bar on Marcus' download tool crawled agonizingly slow. The opposing IT guy was tearing through the primary drives. The firewall suddenly detected our unauthorized data stream. Warning messages popped up indicating that our connection ports were being forcefully closed one by one. He sees us, Marcus warned, gritting his teeth. He is actively hunting my IP address. I have maybe 60 seconds before he completely severs the connection and bricks the router. Get into my dad's encrypted backup drive, I instructed, pointing at a specific node on the network map. He always kept his most sensitive private logs isolated from the main restaurant database. Marcus pivoted his attack, slicing through the encryption protocols of the hidden drive. A list of bizarrely named folders populated the screen. They were all being deleted in real time. My eyes scanned the vanishing list, desperately searching for anything familiar. Then I saw it. Wait! I shouted, tapping the glass of the monitor. "Stop right there. Grab the folder labeled Nursery." Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Why that one?" he asked. "My parents never had a nursery in that house." I explained, my heart pounding against my ribs. "It is a secure code word my dad used. Grab it now." Marcus immediately redirected all remaining bandwidth to pull that single specific folder. The progress bar jumped to 50%, then 70. The IT guy initiated the final total wipe sequence. The entire network map flashed red. 90%. 95. Suddenly, the monitors went completely black. A bold text box appeared declaring connection terminated. Marcus leaned back heavily in his chair, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. The room was painfully quiet. I held my breath, staring at the blank terminal. "Did you get it?" I whispered. Marcus minimized the terminal window, revealing his clean desktop background. Sitting right in the center of the screen was a single compressed zip file. He turned to me and offered a grim smile. "We got the nursery," he said. "Now let us see what your father hid inside." Marcus double-clicked the compressed file. A loading bar flashed across the screen before a folder burst open. Inside were dozens of video files, meticulously labeled with dates and timestamps. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the list. Marcus clicked on the very first thumbnail to check the camera feed. The video player launched, opening a wide-angle shot of a room. I recognized it instantly. It was my father's private study on the ground floor of the mansion. The angle looked down at the heavy oak desk and leather chairs. It was recording from the top shelf of the massive mahogany bookcase. Sitting right on the edge of that specific shelf for the past 2 decades was my old childhood teddy bear. My father always joked the bear was his silent security guard. I never realized he had installed a motion-activated nanny camera right behind its glass eye. Marcus closed the sample video and sorted the extensive list of files by their creation date. He scrolled to the bottom. The very last file was recorded on a Sunday evening. It was time-stamped exactly 48 hours before my parents were poisoned. My chest tightened. "Play it," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the dark room. Marcus clicked the file and expanded the video to fill the entire screen. The footage was crystal clear, and the audio picked up every single sound in the room. My father was sitting alone at his desk. He was surrounded by thick financial ledgers and tax documents. He had his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he was furiously rubbing his temples. He looked incredibly old and deeply exhausted. Suddenly, the heavy oak door of the study swung open. Bradley walked into the frame. He did not look like the arrogant, polished Wall Street executive who had mocked me at the funeral. He looked completely unhinged. His expensive tie was yanked loose, his hair was disheveled, and his shirt was soaked with sweat. He quickly closed the door behind him and locked it. My father immediately stood up. He grabbed a thick leather-bound ledger and slammed it down onto the desk. The loud crack echoed through the computer speakers, making me flinch. "I told you never to step foot in this house again," my father yelled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying rage. Bradley held up his hands, taking a cautious step forward. "Richard, please listen to me," Bradley begged, his voice shaking with desperation. "It was just a temporary margin call. The market took an unexpected dive, and I just needed a bridge loan for 48 hours. I was going to put every single penny back before the quarterly audit." My father laughed, but it was a bitter, disgusted sound. "A bridge loan," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Bradley. "You forged my signature and used the commercial real estate deeds as collateral. You took out a massive shadow loan against the entire restaurant group. You secretly leveraged my restaurants to cover your Wall Street losses." Bradley dropped his hands, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He tried to speak, but my father cut him off completely. "I built this empire from a single food truck," my father roared, leaning over the desk. "I worked 80-hour weeks so my daughters would never have to struggle. And you thought you could just gamble it away to cover your pathetic day trading failures." Bradley took another step closer, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "Richard, if the bank calls in that loan, I am dead. The people I borrowed the margin money from are not bankers. They are extremely dangerous people. If you just give me 1 week, I can liquidate some assets and cover the spread. You have to help me or they will kill me." My father stared at him with absolute disgust. He slowly reached across the desk and picked up his phone. "I am not helping you cover up federal fraud, Bradley," my father said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. "You are a thief and a parasite. I am calling my lawyer right now to draft a new will. And first thing on Monday morning, I am going to the FBI and cutting you out of everything." The color completely drained from Bradley's face. He stared at my father with a look of pure terror. The video captured the exact second the panic in his eyes shifted into a dark, deadly calculation. He slowly backed away from the desk, unlocked the door, and walked out. The video feed clicked off, returning to the black screen. Marcus and I sat in stunned silence. We finally had the undeniable motive. Bradley knew my father was going to the authorities. He knew he was about to lose everything and go to federal prison. So he poisoned them on Tuesday to silence them forever. He forged the new will to ensure control over the estate so he could sell the restaurants and pay his creditors. My parents died because of his reckless greed. Handing this video to the police was not enough. Bradley would just hire expensive lawyers and delay the trial. I had to destroy him financially first. I told Marcus to back up the footage. The trap was set. The next morning, I transformed my home office into a war room. I drank my coffee black and stared at the 4 glowing monitors arranged in a semicircle on my desk. Armed with the undeniable motive from the teddy bear video, I was ready to dismantle Bradley piece by piece. I booted up my specialized forensic accounting software. It was the exact same enterprise program I used to track international corporate fraud for my largest clients. Bradley thought he was a financial mastermind because he wore expensive Italian suits and threw around Wall Street jargon at family dinners. But in the digital world, money always leaves a highly visible trail. It acts like water, always flowing downward and pooling in the lowest and darkest places. I started by searching for the commercial real estate deeds my father mentioned in the hidden video. I needed to see exactly how Bradley had leveraged the soul food restaurant group. It took me less than an hour to find the first major anomaly. A massive shadow lien had been quietly placed against 3 of our most profitable restaurant locations. The legal paperwork was buried under a complex maze of bureaucratic filings, but the primary creditor was listed as a mysterious holding company based in Delaware. I ran the holding company name through a federal tax database and found it was completely empty. There were no listed employees, no physical corporate address, and no operational history. It was a classic shell company designed specifically to hide the true identity of the owner. I cracked my knuckles and dug much deeper. I bypassed the standard public records and used my certified professional credentials to access the restricted corporate registry. I spent the next 4 hours peeling back dense layers of corporate obfuscation. The Delaware Shell Company was owned by another limited liability corporation in the Cayman Islands, which was in turn managed by a private wealth trust. Bradley had gone through an incredible amount of trouble to mask the origin of this loan, but arrogant men always make a fatal error. He used his own personal email address as the secondary recovery contact for the offshore banking portal of the trust. I ran a cross-reference on the primary account numbers tied to that portal. The screen filled with scrolling data before landing on a series of massive wire transfers. My eyes widened as I read the sheer amounts. Bradley had not just borrowed a small bridge loan to cover a minor market dip. He had pulled exactly $8 million. He dumped the entire amount into a highly volatile margin trading account, betting heavily on a tech stock short squeeze that completely collapsed. I watched the digital timeline of his ruin unfold on my screen. He lost all $8 million in less than 72 hours. The magnitude of his financial incompetence was absolutely staggering. But what truly froze the blood in my veins was the original source of the money. I traced the routing numbers back to their initial port of origin. The funds did not come from an established investment bank or a legitimate private equity firm. They came from a holding bank in Cyprus that was globally notorious for laundering money for Eastern European organized crime. I ran the parent company name through an international financial watch list database. The system immediately flagged it in bright red. It was a known financial front for a highly violent Russian syndicate operating out of New York. Bradley had not borrowed money from suited bankers. He had borrowed $8 million from the Russian mob, and he had used my parents' lifelong legacy as collateral to secure the cash. The terrifying truth crashed over me like a tidal wave. Bradley was not just broke, he was a dead man walking. The Russian syndicate did not care about his elite education or his country club memberships. They wanted their $8 million back immediately, with exorbitant daily interest. If he did not pay them, they would not take him to civil court or negotiate a payment plan. They would put him in a shallow, unmarked grave. That was exactly why he was sweating and completely frantic in the hidden video. That was why he brutally poisoned my parents just 2 days later. My father had threatened to go to the FBI on Monday morning. Federal involvement would have instantly frozen the estate assets and exposed the illegal shadow loan to the authorities, destroying Bradley's only lifeline. Bradley killed my parents to silence my father, seize the estate, and sell off the restaurants fast enough to pay off the Russian mafia before they came for his head. I sat back in my heavy leather chair, staring at the flashing red warning on my monitor. Bradley traded my parents' lives to save his own. He was a desperate, trapped animal running out of time. And now I knew exactly how to use his own terrifying debt to completely destroy him. I spent the next 3 hours compiling every single wire transfer and offshore routing number into an encrypted master file. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Atlanta skyline, casting a pale gray light through my office blinds. My eyes burned from staring at the monitors all night, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. I finally had the absolute truth locked away on a secure drive. Bradley was trapped in a deadly corner, and I held the only key. Marcus was asleep on the small leather sofa in the corner of the room, his arm draped over his eyes. I stood up to stretch my aching back and walked to the kitchen for a fresh pot of coffee. Just as I poured the dark liquid into my mug, a sudden violent pounding echoed through the house. Someone was banging on the front door with heavy, aggressive fists. The loud noise jolted Marcus awake instantly. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and followed me down the hallway. I looked through the peephole and saw a man wearing a cheap windbreaker and carrying a thick clipboard. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door a few inches. The man did not even ask for my name. He simply shoved a thick manila envelope through the crack in the door and stated that I had been officially served. He turned and walked away before I could even process what was happening. I closed the door and tore open the heavy paper envelope. I pulled out a stack of legal documents stamped with the official seal of the county court. I scanned the bold text at the top of the first page. It was a formal notice to vacate. It was an eviction notice. My heart skipped a beat as I read the plaintiff name listed below the seal. It was the central holding company for my parents' soul food restaurant group. Marcus read the document over my shoulder, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "How can they evict us from our own home?" Marcus asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "We pay the mortgage every single month." I stared at the legal description of the property, and suddenly the horrifying reality clicked into place. "We pay the mortgage on the physical structure," I explained, my voice barely a whisper. "But we do not own the dirt underneath it. 5 years ago, when my parents bought this specific lot to help us build our starter home, they purchased the land using corporate funds to secure a commercial tax write-off. The deed to the physical land is still technically held under the restaurant group's central portfolio. And because Bradley forged the power of attorney, he controls the entire portfolio. He is the legal landlord of the ground our house sits on. He found the one hidden loophole in our lives, and he was using it to render us completely homeless. Before Marcus could even formulate a response, my cell phone began vibrating on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up, flashing a picture of my sister Chloe. I stared at the phone for a long moment, letting the anger simmer in my veins before I reached out and answered the call. I did not say hello. I just put the phone to my ear and waited. A loud dramatic sniffle echoed through the speaker, followed by the unmistakable sound of fake crying. Maya, I am so incredibly sorry, Chloe whined, her voice trembling with forced emotion. I tried to stop him. I really did. But you know exactly how Bradley gets when he is completely stressed out about the family business. I remained completely silent, refusing to give her the satisfaction of hearing my voice break. Chloe paused, expecting me to argue, but when I said nothing, she continued her performance. He says the company needs liquid capital immediately. Chloe explained, her tone shifting slightly, shedding some of the fake sorrow. He says selling your lot to a commercial developer is the absolute fastest way to secure the cash we need for the estate. He told me to tell you that it is just business and it is nothing personal. But honestly, Maya, maybe if you had been a better sister and just helped me out when my boutique was failing, we would not be in this terrible mess. You really brought this entire situation on yourself. You turned your back on this family when we needed you most. Bradley says you have exactly 48 hours to pack your things and get off the property before the county sheriff comes to physically remove your belongings. She ended the call with a sharp click, leaving me listening to the dead silence of the room. I slowly lowered the phone and placed it back on the marble counter. Marcus was staring at me, waiting for me to break down or throw something against the wall. Instead, I picked up my coffee mug and took a slow, deliberate sip. We need to call Julian right now, Marcus said, reaching for his phone. We can file an emergency stay of eviction and fight this in civil court. I reached out and gently pushed his hand down. No, I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of any panic. That is exactly what Bradley wants us to do. He wants us completely distracted by a desperate legal fight over this house. He is trying to drain our energy and our resources so he can finalize the sale of the restaurant chain and flee the country with his cash payout before the Russian syndicate finds him. Let him have his little victory today. If we fight him on the eviction, he will know we are onto his larger scheme. Marcus looked at me with deep concern. Maya, we have 48 hours before we are legally homeless. Where are we going to go? We are going to pack our bags, I said. Let Bradley think he has completely broken my spirit, because while he is celebrating, I am preparing a trap he will never escape. I pushed the eviction notice aside and turned my attention back to the glowing monitors. The house did not matter right now. Bricks and wood could be replaced, but I needed the final nail in Bradley's coffin. I needed the murder weapon. He had planted the physical vial in my green recycling bin to frame me, but he had to acquire the poison from somewhere. Thallium is an incredibly rare heavy metal. It is highly regulated and not something you can buy at a local hardware store. It requires specific industrial licensing or illegal underground networks. I started digging into the darkest corners of his financial footprint. I knew that if he owed the Russian mob $8 million, he was already deeply comfortable operating outside the law. Marcus pulled his chair up beside mine and helped me establish a secure proxy network so we could safely navigate encrypted routing protocols without triggering alarms. I went back to Bradley's personal bank records, focusing specifically on the 2 weeks immediately preceding the murder of my parents. I was no longer looking for massive wire transfers. I was looking for small, unaccounted transactions. It took hours of grueling line-by-line analysis, but I finally spotted a slight anomaly. There was a series of 4 withdrawals each for exactly $2,000, carefully disguised as recurring consulting fees paid to a generic media group. I ran the routing numbers and hit a solid brick wall. The bank account did not exist. Instead, the money had been funneled directly into a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange. Bradley had converted the cash into a privacy-focused cryptocurrency heavily favored by illicit marketplaces because it was designed to obscure transaction histories. Bradley probably thought his tracks were completely invisible. Most amateur criminals believe crypto is an untraceable magic trick. But as a forensic accountant, I know that blockchain ledgers are permanent public records of every single movement. If you know the specific exit node and the exact timestamp of the conversion, you can unravel the digital knot. I handed the keyboard to Marcus. He deployed a specialized algorithm designed to trace shattered blockchain pathways. We sat in silence watching the terminal window violently scroll through thousands of encrypted data packets. Suddenly, the scrolling stopped. The algorithm had successfully reassembled the transaction chain. I tracked the digital wallet straight to a dark web marketplace that specialized in restricted industrial chemicals and unregulated pharmaceuticals. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened the final digital ledger. There it was, in plain text. The ledger showed a confirmed purchase of highly pure thallium salts. The transaction was finalized exactly 10 days before my parents ate their final meal. The dark web vendor required a digital confirmation ping to verify that the anonymous buyer had successfully received the illegal package. I isolated that specific confirmation ping and pulled the raw network data. Marcus ran the raw data through his tracking software, tracing the signal backward through a maze of global servers. A map appeared on the screen, drawing a bright red line across the globe until it stopped right in the heart of downtown Atlanta. The IP address matched the central router at Bradley's luxury high-rise apartment. It was the exact same router he had used to lock me out of my parents' corporate accounts. I was staring at the undeniable digital receipt for a double homicide. I felt a massive wave of triumph wash over me, but it very quickly faded into a bitter frustration. I stared at the hexadecimal code on the screen, knowing exactly how Detective Hayes would look at this evidence. He would simply fold his arms and say, an IP address could easily be spoofed. He would argue that any skilled hacker could have breached Bradley's home network to make the dark web purchase and frame him. The police were already heavily biased against me. Presenting them with a highly complex dark web crypto ledger would just look like more of my digital manipulation to a confused jury. Proving he bought the poison was not enough to guarantee a conviction. I had to prove exactly why he bought it in a way that left absolutely zero room for reasonable doubt. I needed to catch him actively trying to steal the massive corporate payout he murdered my parents for. If federal agents caught him mid-transaction with his hands buried deep in the stolen estate funds, the financial motive and the digital murder weapon would instantly lock together into an ironclad federal indictment he could never escape. I turned to Marcus and told him to pack our most essential electronics and clothing. We were moving to a secure hotel downtown where I could safely execute the next critical phase of my plan. I needed to feed Bradley's massive ego and make him feel so invincible that he would lower his guard completely. The trap was ready. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Chloe's number, taking a deep breath to prepare for the performance of my life. When she answered, I made sure my voice trembled. I forced a sob into the back of my throat and begged her to let me come over to the mansion to talk. I told her I was completely exhausted and could not fight anymore. Chloe sounded incredibly smug when she agreed, telling me Bradley would generously grant me 15 minutes of his time. Marcus dropped me off at the front gates of the estate an hour later. I walked up the long, sweeping driveway, keeping my shoulders slumped and my head bowed. I needed to look like a woman who had lost absolutely everything. When I reached the heavy oak front doors, they were already open. Bradley was standing in the foyer, leaning against the marble console table with his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing a casual cashmere sweater and a smirk that made my skin crawl. Chloe was sitting in the adjacent living room, flipping through a high-end real estate magazine. I stepped inside the house where my parents had just been murdered, feeling a heavy ghost of their presence. But I pushed the grief down and let the fake tears flow. "Please, Bradley," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. "You cannot throw us out on the street in 48 hours. Marcus and I have nowhere to go. I will not contest the will, and I will not bother you about the business ever again. Just please let us keep the house. It is the only thing we have left." I brought my hands up to my face, letting my shoulders shake with manufactured sobs. I peeked through my fingers to gauge his reaction. Bradley was practically glowing. His chest puffed out, and his smirk widened into a full predatory smile. He slowly walked over to me, his expensive leather loafers clicking against the hardwood floor. He circled me once, taking in my messy hair and my stained sweatpants. I had intentionally dressed down to sell the image of a completely broken woman. You know, Maya, it is incredibly refreshing to finally see you understand your actual place in this family, Bradley said, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. You marched around for years acting like you were superior to us just because you had a fancy corporate job. You thought you were untouchable. But look at you now. You are standing in my house begging for scraps like a stray dog. Chloe closed her magazine and walked over, standing next to her husband. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure disgust. It is honestly pathetic, Maya, Chloe added, crossing her arms tightly. We told you this was just business, but you always have to make everything into a massive dramatic spectacle. If you had just been respectful to Bradley from the beginning, maybe he would have given you a little more time. But you chose to be difficult. You brought this entirely on yourself. I lowered my hands and looked up at them, forcing more tears to spill down my cheeks. I know, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I was wrong, and I am so sorry. Please, Bradley, I am begging you. Just give me a little more time to find an apartment and pack up our lives. Bradley stared at me, soaking up every single second of my humiliation. This was exactly what his massive, fragile ego desperately needed. He needed to completely conquer the smart, successful sister-in-law who always saw right through his lies. He walked over to the marble console table and picked up a crisp white folder. He pulled out a legally binding waiver and a shiny silver pen. He held the document out toward me, his eyes locked onto mine. I am a generous man, Maya, Bradley said smoothly. I am willing to give you a 30-day extension on the eviction. But nothing in this world is free. You are going to sign this waiver right here and right now. This document states that you officially surrender any and all rights to contest your parents' will. It legally prevents you from suing the estate, claiming any portion of the corporate assets, or challenging my authority as the sole financial executor. If you sign this, you get your 30 days to pack your garbage and leave. If you refuse, I will call the sheriff and have you forcibly removed from the property tonight. I looked at the piece of paper, pretending to hesitate. I let my hands shake as I reached out and took the shiny silver pen from his grasp. I acted like I was signing my own death warrant. But deep inside my mind, I was laughing hysterically. Bradley thought this piece of paper protected him from my retaliation. He had absolutely no idea that his forged will was already completely worthless because of the blind trust my parents had established years ago. I slowly dragged the pen across the signature line, sealing the fake surrender. I handed the document back to him, keeping my head bowed in total defeat. Bradley snatched the paper from my trembling hands, folding it carefully and sliding it into his jacket pocket. He looked down at me with ultimate satisfaction, completely blind to the fact that he had just stepped perfectly into the center of my trap. Bradley let out a theatrical sigh of relief. He walked to the mahogany bar my father had designed and poured himself another scotch. He offered me nothing, swirling the liquid and taking a triumphant sip. You know, Maya, it did not have to be this ugly, he said, echoing in the quiet house. If you had just accepted that your parents knew what was best for their financial legacy, we could have avoided all this nasty legal drama. But you just had to push. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, maintaining my persona of a defeated woman. What are you going to do with the restaurants? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I knew what he was going to do, but needed him to say it out loud to gorge himself on his own arrogance. Bradley chuckled a harsh, dismissive sound. He took another sip and leaned against the bar. I am going to do what Richard and Elaine should have done a decade ago, he stated plainly. I am liquidating the entire restaurant brand. I have already secured a very lucrative buyout from a major corporate hospitality group based out of Chicago. They own dozens of sterile, profitable, fast casual chains across the Midwest. My head snapped up. I let my genuine shock bleed into my performance. You are selling the entire chain to a corporate franchise? I asked, my voice trembling. My parents spent 30 years building that brand. It is a staple in the African American community. People line up for blocks on Sundays just to eat my mother's recipes. You cannot just erase all of that history. Bradley rolled his eyes, waving his hand in the air, as if swatting away a pesky fly. "Oh, please, Maya, spare me the emotional cultural speech," he scoffed. "Your parents ran those places like glorified soup kitchens. They gave out free meals on holidays and paid their staff way above market rate out of some misplaced sense of community loyalty. It was a financial nightmare. The buyers from Chicago do not care about your mother's secret recipes. They are going to bulldoze the original locations and replace them with drive-thrus. They are going to strip the menus down and mass-produce the food in cheap commercial commissaries." He walked closer to me, looking down his nose with an expression of absolute disdain. "Let us be brutally honest for a second, Maya," he sneered. "Your parents built an empire selling ghetto grease. It is completely unscalable. The Chicago group is going to sanitize the menu, rebrand the entire chain, and market it to wealthy suburban neighborhoods. They are going to take the soul out of the soul food and turn it into pure, unadulterated profit. And I am going to walk away with a massive cash payout for facilitating the transition." The sheer disrespect in his words was suffocating. He was not just stealing their money, he was actively degrading their entire existence. He was taking the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors and reducing it to a racial slur and a corporate buyout. I slowly turned my head to look at my sister. I desperately wanted to see a flicker of outrage in her eyes. I wanted to see the daughter who grew up eating that food and watching our parents work 18-hour days finally stand up and defend her family. Instead, Chloe was sitting comfortably on the plush white sofa, a bottle of expensive pink nail polish resting on the glass coffee table in front of her. She was carefully painting her nails, her face completely blank. She did not even look up when Bradley insulted our parents' legacy. She simply blew on her freshly painted fingernails, checking the glossy finish under the chandelier light. "Chloe," I whispered, my voice thick with a mixture of horror and profound sadness. "Did you hear what he just called our parents' life work? How can you sit there and let him disrespect them like this? They gave you everything you ever asked for." Chloe finally glanced up, her blue eyes cold and empty. "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Maya," she sighed, returning her attention to her nails. "Bradley knows how to handle big business. Mom and Dad were old-fashioned and they did not understand modern scaling. We are about to be incredibly wealthy and I can finally launch my new lifestyle brand. You are just jealous because you are walking away with absolutely nothing. You should go pack your house before the sheriff comes." I stared at them, realizing they were both hollow and completely devoid of human empathy. I nodded slowly, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. "You are right, Chloe," I said softly. "I should go back home and pack." I turned away from my sister and began walking toward the heavy front doors. My shoulders remained slumped, and I dragged my feet against the hardwood floor to maintain the illusion of total defeat. As I passed the large marble kitchen island, I paused to grab my leather purse. I deliberately fumbled with the straps, letting my hands shake. In the process, I let a thick manila folder slide out from underneath my bag and drop quietly onto the polished marble surface. I did not look back. I simply walked out the front door and pulled it shut behind me, listening to the heavy click of the lock. Marcus was waiting in the car at the bottom of the driveway. I climbed into the passenger seat and immediately let out a long breath, dropping the pathetic victim persona. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small black receiver, plugging it into the car's audio system. Marcus looked at me with a questioning raised eyebrow. I smiled and turned up the volume dial. I did not just leave a folder on the counter. I explained, my voice returning to its normal, confident pitch. I left a highly sensitive audio bug taped inside the spine of that folder. Now we just sit back and listen to the rat take the bait. The car speakers crackled to life. We could hear the ambient sounds of the mansion kitchen echoing through the receiver. Chloe's footsteps clicked heavily across the hardwood floor as she walked upstairs to her new master bedroom, completely oblivious to the crumbling world around her. Then we heard Bradley's heavy loafers approaching the kitchen island. He poured another generous splash of scotch into his crystal glass. The sound of ice clinking against the glass was followed by a sudden sharp silence. He had spotted the folder resting on the marble. "What is this garbage?" he muttered to himself. We heard the crisp rustle of thick paper being pulled from the manila sleeve. I closed my eyes, visualizing exactly what he was looking at. I had spent 3 hours meticulously forging a highly confidential corporate tax projection. It looked absolutely authentic, complete with my parents' signature stamps and official accounting seals. The document outlined a secret corporate escrow account that had been quietly accumulating capital for the past 10 years. According to the falsified projection, there was exactly $5 million in untraceable liquid cash sitting in that reserve. But the trap was in the specific legal clause I had written at the bottom of the page. The clause explicitly stated that the $5 million could only be unlocked and withdrawn upon the total authorized sale of the restaurant chain. Bradley gasped. It was a sharp intake of air that practically vibrated through the car speakers. $5 million in liquid cash. He whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of shock and overwhelming greed. He began shuffling the papers, frantically reading the clauses out loud to himself. Unlocks upon final transfer of ownership, he read. Untraceable corporate surplus. Marcus looked at me and grinned. He took the bait, Marcus whispered. I held up a finger, telling him to wait. The performance was not over yet. We listened as Bradley immediately pulled out his cell phone and started dialing. The phone rang twice before a man answered. Bradley did not even bother with polite introductions. Listen to me, David Bradley barked, pacing across the kitchen floor. We need to expedite the contract signing for the restaurant buyout. I do not care about the standard 30-day due diligence period. I am willing to drop the total asking price by $2 million right now, if you bring the final paperwork to my house for a private signing party this Saturday night. We heard the buyer hesitate clearly, surprised by the sudden discount. But corporate greed is universal. The buyer agreed to expedite the process and secure the signatures this weekend. Bradley ended the call, letting out a loud, victorious laugh that echoed through the empty kitchen. But he was not finished. We heard him dial another number. This time, it was an international luxury travel concierge. Yes, I need to book a private charter flight out of Atlanta. Bradley said, his voice dropping to a low, secretive whisper. I need an immediate departure for this Sunday morning destination, the Cayman Islands. Just a single passenger. No, my wife will not be joining me. A cold chill swept through the quiet car. Marcus stared at the glowing radio dashboard, completely stunned by the absolute sociopathy of the man we were dealing with. Bradley was going to sign the contract on Saturday night, unlock the fake $5 million reserve, and flee the country on Sunday morning. He was going to take the money and run far away, leaving his own loyal wife behind to face the brutal wrath of the Russian mafia alone. He knew the criminal syndicate would come looking for their $8 million, and he was completely willing to let them violently torture and kill Chloe while he sat safely on a sunny beach in the Caribbean. I reached out and turned off the audio receiver, looking at Marcus with a hard, determined stare. The trap is officially sprung, I said, my voice steady. Now we let him throw a lavish party. Saturday night arrived with a heavy, stifling humidity over the massive estate. Marcus parked our sedan down the quiet street, hidden in the shadows of the oak trees. I watched through the windshield as luxury vehicles pulled through the wrought iron gates. Bradley had spared no expense, using my parents' money to fund his victory lap. Valet drivers scrambled to park the sleek sports cars along the manicured lawn. Waitstaff carried heavy silver trays of expensive champagne through the front doors. The mansion was illuminated, looking like a beacon of stolen wealth against the night sky. We had tapped into the mansion's security cameras, giving us a live video feed of the living room on Marcus' tablet. The screen glowed intensely in the dark cabin. I watched Bradley working the room like a corrupt politician. He wore a pristine, tailored tuxedo, holding a crystal glass of expensive scotch, and laughing loudly with a tight group of wealthy white men. These were the corporate buyers from Chicago, eager to pave over my family history for a cheap franchise deal. Bradley was eagerly shaking their hands, believing he was just short hours away from a $5 million cash payday and a permanent escape to the islands. In the background of the live surveillance feed, I spotted my sister. Chloe was standing alone near the massive stone fireplace, wearing a glittering silver designer dress. She was holding a large glass of dark red wine swaying slightly on her high heels. While Bradley actively courted the corporate buyers, he completely ignored his own wife. He did not look at her, he did not speak to her, and he certainly did not tell her to pack a suitcase for the Cayman Islands. She was drinking heavily, totally oblivious to the horrifying fact that she was nothing more than temporary collateral damage in his exit strategy. She truly thought she was the untouchable queen, but she was actually the ultimate sacrificial lamb. I pulled my eyes away from the screen and picked up my cell phone. The time for silently gathering digital evidence was over. I dialed a direct emergency number I had acquired during my forensic investigation, the personal cell phone of Special Agent Miller from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. He answered, sounding irritated by the late hour. Agent Miller, I have a verified active wire fraud in progress, accompanied by forged federal tax documents and a fabricated last will and testament, I said, my voice perfectly steady. The primary perpetrator is Bradley Vance, and he is currently executing a fraudulent corporate sale at the property located on West Paces Ferry Road. He has a private charter flight booked for tomorrow morning to flee federal jurisdiction. I just emailed your secure server the complete encrypted dossier, including his dark web cryptocurrency receipts for the rare thallium used to murder my parents. Bring a tactical team, because he is a desperate flight risk. I hung up the phone before the agent could respond, knowing the undeniable digital evidence would immediately trigger a federal raid. Marcus looked at me, nodding his head in silent approval. But I was not finished yet. The FBI would arrest him, but I wanted him absolutely terrified before they arrived. I opened a highly secure encrypted dialing application on my mobile device. I had pulled the burner contact number for the holding company located in Cyprus, the direct line to the violent Russian syndicate debt collectors. I dialed the international number. It rang 4 times before a man answered with a heavy, threatening silence. I used an advanced voice modulation software program to mask my identity. I am calling regarding the $8 million margin debt owed by Bradley Vance, I said, keeping the artificial voice cold and robotic. He is currently at his Atlanta estate finalizing a massive corporate sale. He plans to take a $5 million cash reserve tonight and flee to the Cayman Islands tomorrow morning, leaving your debt completely unpaid. I suggest you collect your money tonight before federal agents raid the property. I terminated the secure encrypted connection instantly and deleted the application, erasing the digital trail. I leaned back against the leather car seat, taking a slow, deep breath to steady my racing heart. The heavy pieces were all finally in motion. The federal authorities were mobilizing their tactical units, and the dangerous Russian mafia was already dispatching an armed collection team to the mansion. Bradley had built a fragile house of cards directly on top of my parents' graves, and I had just lit the match to burn it all down. I looked over at Marcus and grabbed the metal door handle. It is time, I said. Let us go crash a party and watch his entire fake empire collapse around him. We stepped out of the sedan, and the thick, humid air immediately hit my face. I smoothed down the front of my simple black dress, a stark contrast to the glittering gowns and expensive tuxedos moving beyond the glowing windows. Marcus walked right beside me, his posture rigid and his eyes scanning the perimeter like a soldier entering a hostile combat zone. As we approached the grand entrance, a valet driver holding a tray of keys stepped into our path, trying to ask for our formal invitation. Marcus did not even break his stride. He simply locked eyes with the young man and kept walking, forcing the valet to quickly step aside. I reached out and pushed the heavy oak double doors wide open. The loud hum of overlapping conversations and the soft, elegant melody of a hired string quartet spilled out into the night. We crossed the threshold and walked straight into the grand foyer. The sheer opulence of the party was sickening. Waitstaff in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of imported caviar and vintage champagne. The corporate buyers from Chicago stood in a tight circle near the massive stone fireplace, laughing loudly at something Bradley was saying. My sister Chloe was slumped on a velvet sofa in the far corner, her wine glass tilting dangerously close to spilling on her expensive designer dress. Nobody noticed us at first. We were like two dark shadows slipping into a room entirely blinded by its own artificial light. But then Bradley turned his head to signal a waiter for another drink. His eyes swept across the foyer and locked instantly onto mine. The smug, arrogant smile vanished from his face so fast it looked like he had been physically slapped. His pale skin flushed with a sudden violent shade of red. He completely dropped his polished corporate persona in a fraction of a second. "What are you doing here?" Bradley bellowed, his voice echoing over the string quartet and silencing the entire room. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "I told you to get off my property. Get this trash out of my house right now." The live music screeched to a halt. Every single guest in the massive room turned to stare at us. The wealthy buyers from Chicago exchanged highly confused glances, whispering quietly among themselves. Two large security guards dressed in tight black suits immediately detached themselves from the walls and started walking rapidly toward us. They reached out to grab my arms, but Marcus instantly stepped in front of me, forming an impenetrable human shield. He planted his feet firmly and shoved the first guard back with enough force to send the heavy man stumbling into a glass cocktail table. "Do not even think about touching her," Marcus warned, his voice dangerously low and echoing through the completely silent room. "I am not leaving," I said, my voice projecting clearly and calmly across the massive space. "I promised you I would pack my things. Bradley and I am just here to gather a few remaining family assets before the end of the night." Bradley looked absolutely frantic. He looked frantically at his corporate investors, trying desperately to salvage his dignified image. "I apologize for this, gentlemen," Bradley stammered, forcing a nervous, highly artificial laugh. "This is my mentally unstable sister-in-law. She was recently disinherited, and she is clearly having a very public psychological breakdown. Please excuse the interruption. My private security team will handle this situation immediately." He aggressively gestured for the guards to move in again, but I did not wait for them to recover their balance. I sidestepped Marcus and walked directly toward the center of the living room with absolute unshakable purpose. Bradley had set up a massive 80-inch smart screen display on an elegant rolling stand near the fireplace to showcase his financial projections and brand expansion plans to the buyers. A sleek presentation console sat right beneath the glowing monitor. "Hey," Bradley shouted, taking a sudden panicked step toward me. "Step away from that expensive equipment." I ignored him completely. I reached into my purse and pulled out my digital tablet, along with a heavy braided connector cable. My hands were not shaking anymore. The overwhelming grief and paralyzing fear that had suffocated me for the past week had been entirely replaced by a cold, lethal precision. I plugged the cable directly into the main input port of the presentation console. Bradley lunged forward, trying to snatch the tablet from my hands, but Marcus was significantly faster. Marcus stepped up and grabbed Bradley's arm, twisting it back just enough to freeze him instantly in place in front of his guests. "You are going to want to see this, Bradley," I said, staring directly into his terrified eyes. "You wanted to show your new business partners the true value of this family empire tonight. I think it is only fair that they see the complete financial picture before they sign any legally binding corporate contracts." I tapped the screen of my tablet, overriding the local display settings and seizing complete digital control of the massive monitor. The bright blue glow of my custom forensic software instantly illuminated the darkened room, casting long, harsh shadows across Bradley's pale and sweating face. The bright blue glow shifted into stark white as high-resolution scans of heavily redacted legal documents filled the 80-inch screen. The sharp contrast illuminated the grand living room like a lightning strike. I turned my back to the screen and faced the tight circle of wealthy corporate buyers from Chicago. "Gentlemen, I highly recommend you put your expensive pens back in your pockets," I said, projecting my voice so every person in the room heard every single syllable. If you sign any purchase agreement with this man tonight, you are actively participating in a $15 million corporate fraud, and the federal government will seize your assets by Monday morning." Bradley lunged forward again, screaming at the top of his lungs. "Turn that screen off!" he yelled, his face contorted in absolute panic. He looked desperately at the security guards, but Marcus shifted his weight, cracking his knuckles with a terrifying calm that kept them completely frozen in place. "Do not listen to a word she says," Bradley pleaded, turning back to the lead buyer. "She is a disgruntled relative, trying to extort us because she was written out of the will. David, please let us go to my private study and finalize the paperwork right now. We can call the police from there." David, the lead corporate buyer, took a slow, deliberate step away from Bradley. He adjusted his silver-rimmed glasses and stared intensely at the massive monitor. He was a ruthless businessman, and he did not become wealthy by ignoring massive legal red flags. "Hold on, Bradley," David said, his tone suddenly icy and deeply professional. "I want to read what she is projecting. We are talking about an 8-figure acquisition. I am not signing a single page if there is an active dispute over the chain of title. Proceed, young lady." I tapped my tablet, bringing the crucial paragraphs of the document into sharp focus. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the crystal glasses. "What you are looking at is an irrevocable blind trust," I explained, walking closer to the screen so everyone could follow my words. "5 years ago, my parents realized their soul food business was growing too rapidly. They wanted to permanently protect their legacy from financial predators. So they completely relinquished their direct personal ownership of the entire restaurant group, the commercial real estate portfolio, and the very dirt this mansion sits on. They transferred every single asset they possessed into this highly secure trust." I swiped to the next slide, projecting a side-by-side comparison of the blind trust and the fraudulent will Bradley had read at the lawyer's office just days prior. "That means the miraculous new will my brother-in-law presented to the probate court last week is nothing but a completely worthless piece of paper," I continued, my voice ringing with total absolute authority. "You cannot inherit or sell assets that the deceased did not legally own at the time of their death. The restaurant chain does not belong to my parents' estate. It belongs exclusively to the trust." A heavy wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd of local elites and party guests. Chloe finally stood up from the velvet sofa, her wine glass slipping from her hand and shattering against the hardwood floor. She stared at the screen, her mouth slightly open, struggling to process the complex financial truth through her alcohol haze. David frowned, reading the fine print on the glowing 80-inch screen. His eyes darted between the projected documents and Bradley's sweating face. "And who exactly is the legally appointed trustee?" David asked, his voice echoing in the tense room. "If the parents did not own the company, who holds the actual authority to authorize a corporate sale?" I smiled, a cold, calculated smile, and tapped my tablet one final time. The massive screen transitioned to the final signature page of the trust agreement. It displayed my full legal name in bold black ink, right alongside the federal notary stamps, and my father's signature. "I am the sole trustee," I announced, watching the last drop of hope completely drain from Bradley's eyes. "I am the only person on this earth with the legal authority to sign over those restaurants. My parents appointed me to protect this family because they knew exactly what kind of snake was sleeping in their house." I took a step toward Bradley, closing the distance between us. Bradley forged a fake will and threw an extravagant party to sell an empire, but he forgot to check who actually held the keys to the castle. I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper that carried across the silent room. "You do not own the restaurants, Bradley. You do not own the corporate bank accounts. You do not even own the glass of scotch you are holding right now. You are completely and utterly broke." The heavy silence following my words was shattered by the sound of David throwing his expensive gold pen onto the marble table. The metal clattered loudly against the stone, echoing like a judge banging a gavel. David looked at Bradley with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "You lied to us," David stated, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and professional terror. You brought us into a federal fraud scheme across state lines. We could have been indicted by the Securities and Exchange Commission for this. David turned to his team of executives and aggressively signaled toward the front door. We are leaving right now, David ordered. Do not speak to anyone and call our legal department the second we get into the cars. We need to completely scrub our association with this man before the authorities arrive. The Chicago buyers scrambled frantically, gathering their briefcases and suit jackets. They moved with the terrified urgency of men trying to outrun a burning building. Bradley completely panicked. He dropped his crystal glass of scotch, letting it shatter on the pristine hardwood floor. The amber liquid splashed against his expensive leather loafers, but he did not even notice. He lunged toward David, grabbing the sleeve of the older man's suit. "David, wait, please." Bradley begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "I can explain everything. It is just a minor legal misunderstanding with the probate court. We can still make the deal happen. I will cut the asking price by another $5 million right now. Just sign the preliminary paperwork. I need the money tonight, David, please." David violently ripped his arm away from Bradley's grasp. "Do not ever contact my firm again," David snarled. "If you call my office, I will personally hand over every email and recorded phone call we have directly to the federal authorities. You are completely toxic." David and his entire executive team stormed out of the living room, pushing past the bewildered party guests and rushing out the heavy oak front doors. The massive $15 million corporate buyout completely evaporated in less than 60 seconds. Along with it went the phantom $5 million cash reserve Bradley had desperately planned to steal. His escape route to the Cayman Islands was officially destroyed. He had absolutely nothing left to save him. Bradley stood frozen in the center of the grand living room, watching the open front door where his entire future had just vanished. His chest heaved up and down as his breathing became ragged and shallow. The realization of his absolute ruin finally crashed down upon him. He had no money, he had no power, he had no corporate buyers. And worst of all, he owed a highly violent Russian crime syndicate $8 million that he could no longer pay. He was a dead man, and he knew it. The sheer terror in his mind rapidly mutated into a blind, violent rage. He had lost everything, and he knew exactly who was responsible for his total destruction. He slowly turned his head to look at me. His face was completely contorted, his eyes wild and bloodshot. The polished Wall Street executive was gone, replaced by a trapped and desperate animal. "You ruined my life!" Bradley screamed, a guttural sound that tore through his throat, echoing against the high ceiling. He did not hesitate. He lowered his shoulder and lunged directly at me across the living room. His hands curled into tight fists, and his face twisted with pure murderous intent. He intended to physically destroy me right there in front of half the city elite. He charged like a wild bull, completely blinded by his own catastrophic failure. I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. I simply stood there looking at him with absolute cold indifference. I knew I did not have to move because Marcus was already in motion. Marcus stepped directly into Bradley's path, moving with the terrifying speed and precision of his military training. Before Bradley could even raise his hands, Marcus grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo jacket. Marcus used Bradley's own violent momentum against him, twisting his body and sweeping his leg with brutal efficiency. Bradley flew through the air and crashed down onto the hard marble floor with a sickening thud. The impact knocked the wind completely out of his lungs, sending a shockwave through the room. Before Bradley could even gasp for air, Marcus dropped his heavy knee directly onto Bradley's chest, pinning him entirely to the ground. Marcus grabbed both of Bradley's wrists and twisted them behind his back, holding him face down against the cold stone. "Stay exactly where you are," Marcus commanded, his voice radiating absolute lethal authority. "If you try to move a single muscle, I will break both of your arms without hesitation." The remaining party guests erupted into absolute chaos. Local politicians and wealthy socialites shrieked in terror, grabbing their coats and rushing blindly toward the exits. They wanted nothing to do with the violent spectacle unfolding on the floor or the massive financial fraud that had just been exposed. The string quartet packed their instruments and fled. Within minutes, the massive grand living room was completely empty of everyone except me, Marcus, my sister Chloe, and the pathetic man pinned to the marble. I slowly walked over and looked down at Bradley. He was gasping for air, his cheek pressed hard against the floor, looking completely broken and defeated. But my revenge was still not finished. I turned my back on the pathetic sight of him struggling against Marcus and walked calmly back to the presentation console. The grand living room was eerily quiet now, stripped of the wealthy corporate buyers and terrified socialites. Only a few stragglers remained hovering near the doorway, too paralyzed by the unfolding drama to actually leave. My sister Chloe was still standing near the massive stone fireplace, her face pale and her hands shaking as she gripped a fresh glass of champagne she had poured during the chaos. I tapped the glowing screen of my tablet, advancing the presentation to the next slide. The massive 80-inch monitor blinked black for a fraction of a second before a high-definition video filled the display. It was the hidden footage from my childhood teddy bear camera. I reached over and pushed the master volume slider on the sound system to its absolute maximum limit. The heavy acoustic speakers built into the corners of the mansion roared to life. My father's voice boomed through the room, filled with an earth-shattering anger that made the floorboards vibrate. "I told you never to step foot in this house again," my father yelled from the digital recording. The footage showed Bradley sweating and pleading in the private study exactly 48 hours before the murders. Then came the fatal confrontation. "You secretly leveraged my restaurants to cover your Wall Street losses," my father roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I am going to the FBI on Monday and cutting you out of everything." The audio cut off, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Bradley thrashed violently under Marcus, trying desperately to hide his face from the screen, but Marcus simply applied more pressure to his spine, keeping him hopelessly pinned to the cold marble floor. I looked directly at Chloe. Her eyes were wide with pure horror, staring at the frozen frame of her husband, looking like a cornered rat in our father's study. "He did not just forge a will to steal a company, Chloe," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy air. "He murdered our parents to stop Dad from going to the federal authorities. He traded their lives to save himself." I tapped the tablet again. The video vanished, replaced by a complex series of digital financial ledgers and network pathways. I pointed at the screen, highlighting a specific encrypted transaction block. "This is a dark web cryptocurrency receipt," I explained, tracking the exact digital pathway with a bright red laser pointer. 10 days before Mom and Dad died, Bradley converted $2,000 into an untraceable digital currency. He used it to purchase highly pure thallium salts from an illegal underground marketplace. I swiped the screen to reveal the network map Marcus had generated. "And this is the digital confirmation ping the dark web vendor sent when the package was delivered," I continued. "It traces directly back to the IP address of your luxury high-rise apartment. He brought the murder weapon right into your home. The exact heavy metal toxin the medical examiner found in their blood. The exact poison he planted in my recycling bin to frame me for his crime." "No!" Chloe whispered, shaking her head frantically. Her voice was barely audible over the hum of the massive monitor. "No, he would not do that. He loves this family. He promised me we were going to build an empire together." I swiped to the final slide of my presentation. It displayed the offshore banking records from Cyprus and the flight manifest I had intercepted. "He does not love anyone but himself," I said, my tone completely devoid of pity. "He owes $8 million to a Russian organized crime syndicate. He lost it all on a catastrophic margin call and the mob came to collect. He killed our parents so he could sell the restaurants tonight and steal the $5 million cash reserve I tricked him into believing existed." I walked closer to my sister, watching her perfect polished world completely shatter into a million jagged pieces. "And do you know what the absolute worst part is, Chloe?" I asked, leaning in slightly. I tapped into his phone records. He booked a private charter flight to the Cayman Islands for tomorrow morning. A single passenger ticket. He was going to take the cash and vanish, leaving you sitting right here in this house, when the Russian mafia showed up to collect his $8 million debt. He set you up to take the fall and face the mob entirely alone. The crystal champagne glass slipped from Chloe's trembling fingers. It hit the stone hearth of the fireplace and shattered, sending glittering shards of glass and expensive alcohol exploding across the floor. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the velvet sofa, letting out a hollow, agonizing wail that sounded like a wounded animal. The golden child finally realized she had married a monster who viewed her as nothing more than a convenient human shield. Bradley let out a muffled sob against the marble floor, realizing his entire web of lies had been surgically dismantled and exposed to the blinding light of the truth. He had absolutely nowhere left to hide. I stood over them both, breathing in the cold, sterile air of total victory, just as the heavy sound of blaring sirens began to wail in the distance, echoing through the dark Atlanta night. The wail of the sirens grew deafening as it echoed off the stone walls of the estate. Bright red and blue lights suddenly strobed through the massive bay windows, casting frantic shadows across the wrecked living room. Heavy boots pounded against the front steps before the oak doors were violently kicked open. FBI tactical agents in heavy riot gear swarmed into the grand foyer, their assault rifles raised and sweeping the room with laser sights. Local police officers poured in right behind them, including Detective Hayes, who looked completely bewildered by the sheer scale of the federal operation. I stood perfectly still with my hands visible by my sides, watching the inevitable conclusion to Bradley's arrogance unfold. Marcus slowly stood up, raising his hands in the air to show he was not a threat. He took 2 steps back, leaving Bradley writhing on the cold marble floor. Special Agent Miller walked into the room, his eyes scanning the massive digital presentation still glowing brightly on the 80-inch monitor. He looked at me and gave a brief professional nod of acknowledgement. He signaled to his tactical team. 2 heavily armored agents rushed forward, grabbing Bradley by the collar of his ruined tuxedo and dragging him roughly to his feet. They slammed him face first against the stone wall next to the fireplace to secure him. As the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists, Bradley completely lost whatever remained of his sanity. The reality of a massive federal indictment and a double homicide charge finally broke his mind. He thrashed against the agents, twisting his head to look over his shoulder. He did not look at me or the federal agents. He looked directly at his wife. "It was not me," Bradley screamed, his voice cracking in sheer panicked desperation. "It was Chloe. She was the one who wanted them dead. She bought the poison on the dark web because she knew their daily schedule." Chloe stopped crying instantly. Her breath hitched in her throat as she stared at the man she had sworn to love and protect. Bradley was practically foaming at the mouth, spewing rapid-fire lies to anyone who would listen to him. She hated them. Bradley yelled, his eyes wide and manic as the agents patted him down. She hated that they would not fund her stupid lifestyle brand. She manipulated me into the wire fraud. She is the mastermind who planned the entire thing. You have to arrest her right now. He was throwing the woman he married straight to the federal authorities, perfectly willing to watch her get a lethal injection if it meant shaving a few years off his own inevitable life sentence. The ultimate betrayal hit Chloe with the force of a physical blow. The absolute illusion of her perfect wealthy marriage shattered into dust right in front of her eyes. Detective Hayes signaled to a female police officer who unclipped a pair of handcuffs from her belt and began walking slowly toward the velvet sofa. Panic seized Chloe. She scrambled up from the cushions, her high heels slipping on the spilled champagne and shattered glass. She stumbled past the approaching officer and threw herself directly at me. Chloe grabbed my arm with both hands, her perfectly manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. Her face was streaked with black mascara, and her eyes were wide with primal terror. "Maya, please." Chloe sobbed, her voice a hysterical grating pitch. "I am your sister. You know I would never do something like this. Tell them I did not know anything about the mob money or the poison. Tell them I am completely innocent. Please, Maya, you have to save me." I looked down at her hands gripping my arm, and then I looked up into her tear-filled eyes. I felt absolutely nothing. The sister I grew up with died a long time ago, replaced by a hollow shell of greed and entitlement. I remembered how easily she stood in front of the local news cameras and called me a monster to protect her husband. I remembered the cruel smirk on her face when she handed me a 48-hour eviction notice. I remembered her sitting on that exact sofa painting her nails while Bradley mocked the very legacy that put clothes on her back. I reached down and slowly peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. I stepped back, creating a cold, impenetrable distance between us. "I cannot save you, Chloe," I said, my voice completely flat and echoing in the quiet room. "You sat right there and drank his wine while he stole our parents' empire. You laughed while he threw my childhood memories into a dumpster. You knew he was destroying me, and you did absolutely nothing because you wanted the money just as much as he did." The female officer stepped up behind Chloe, grabbing her wrists and pulling them firmly behind her back. The sharp click of the handcuffs sounded like a vault door slamming shut. "You made your choice, Chloe." I continued watching her struggle weakly against the officer as they read her Miranda rights. "You chose the luxury cars and the country clubs over your own flesh and blood. Now you get to face the consequences of the man you married. Enjoy the federal investigation." Chloe collapsed against the female officer, her knees completely giving out under the weight of her immediate future. As they hauled her toward the shattered grand entryway, she looked back at me one last time, her face a twisted mask of desperation and misplaced anger. I stood perfectly tall in the center of the ruined room. "You chose his privilege over our blood," I said, my voice carrying easily over the shouting tactical agents. "You helped him throw me out of my own childhood home. Now you can help him survive in federal prison." I turned my back, completely refusing to watch them drag my sister and her husband out into the flashing lights of the police cruisers. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, severing my ties to that toxic chapter of my life forever. The mansion was suddenly incredibly quiet. The chaotic energy of the party and the violent raid evaporated, leaving only the sound of my own steady breathing. Marcus walked over, stepping carefully around the broken champagne glass, and spilled wine on the marble floor. He wrapped his strong arms around my shoulders, pulling me close. We stood there in the profound silence, listening as the wailing sirens finally faded into the distant city night. The nightmare was officially over, and the absolute reality of my parents' legacy was finally safe. 18 months later, the bright, warm Atlanta sun streamed through the massive bay windows of my father's newly restored executive office. I sat behind his heavy mahogany desk, reviewing the spectacular quarterly financial reports for the restaurant group. We did not sell a single location to that sterile corporate franchise. Instead, I stepped in as the chief executive officer and sole trustee of the estate. I used my forensic accounting background to completely restructure our commercial supply chain and maximize our operational efficiency without sacrificing a single ounce of the soul my parents built into this company. We kept my mother's original recipes, we kept our loyal, dedicated employees, and we even raised their hourly wages. Marcus completely overhauled our corporate cybersecurity infrastructure, ensuring no one could ever breach our private servers again. In fact, we just cut the ribbon on our 12th location, a beautiful, sprawling flagship restaurant right in the heart of downtown Atlanta. We established a fully funded culinary arts scholarship in my parents' names to help young aspiring chefs from the community build their own dreams. Every time I walk through the busy dining room and hear the loud laughter and see the genuine joy on our customers' faces, I know my parents are looking down with absolute pride. We protected their decades of hard work from the greedy people who only saw it as a quick, disposable cash grab. As for Bradley and Chloe, the federal justice system was entirely unforgiving. Bradley attempted to orchestrate a desperate plea deal by offering up operational information on the Russian crime syndicate, but federal prosecutors already had a massive mountain of irrefutable digital evidence against him. He was swiftly convicted of double homicide, massive wire fraud, and racketeering. He will spend the rest of his natural life locked behind concrete walls. Chloe tried relentlessly to play the innocent, naive victim in court, but the financial records proved she was fully aware of the forged corporate documents and the illegal eviction attempt against me. The judge saw right through her manufactured tears and handed her a 10-year federal sentence as an active, willing accomplice to the fraud. They truly thought they could outsmart the legal system and destroy me, but their own blinding narcissism became the exact weapon I used to systematically dismantle them. This entire horrific ordeal taught me a brutal but necessary lesson about the dark reality of toxic family dynamics. Manipulative people will often weaponize the concept of blood relation to guilt you into accepting their relentless abuse and their financial exploitation. They demand blind loyalty while offering nothing but betrayal in return. But loyalty is never an unconditional birthright. It must be earned, respected, and fiercely protected. You have to set ironclad boundaries, even with the people you grew up sharing a home with. You cannot let emotional attachment blind you to the dangerous reality of their actions. Above all else, I learned that financial independence and absolute financial literacy are the greatest shields you can ever build in this world. Abusers rely on your ignorance and your emotional reactions to maintain their control. But when you stay perfectly calm and know exactly how the financial system works, nobody can ever use it to erase you. Have you ever had to use your enemy's arrogance against them to survive? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe for more stories of sweet, absolute justice. The chilling story of Maya Bradley and Chloe serves as a profound reminder that shared DNA does not guarantee loyalty, love, or even basic human decency. The most crucial lesson we can extract from this devastating betrayal is the absolute necessity of establishing ironclad boundaries and cultivating personal financial literacy. Society constantly conditions us to forgive family members, pushing the narrative that blood is always thicker than water. However, toxic individuals often weaponize this exact sentiment to manipulate and exploit their own relatives. Chloe and Bradley hid behind the facade of protecting the family legacy while orchestrating a horrific double murder and a hostile corporate takeover. They relied on the arrogant assumption that Maya would crumble under the emotional weight of her profound grief and public humiliation. Maya triumphed because she removed raw emotion from the equation and relied on cold, analytical facts. Her ultimate weapon was not violent vengeance, it was her deep forensic accounting expertise. Abusers and manipulators thrive in the shadows of your ignorance. They actively count on you, not reading the fine print, not understanding the dense legal jargon, and not knowing your basic rights. When you arm yourself with financial literacy and a comprehensive understanding of the systems governing your life, you immediately strip these predators of their power. Applied knowledge transforms you from a vulnerable target into an impenetrable fortress. Protecting your peace means recognizing exactly when a family member becomes a legitimate threat and having the immense courage to walk away without a shred of guilt. It requires knowing where your money is, understanding your legal standing, and absolutely refusing to be bullied by unearned arrogance. Take a hard look at your own inner circle today and commit to educating yourself on your personal financial rights before someone else tries to leverage your blind spots against you.